Please rewind this cassette.
I honestly don't even know where to begin with this. I had a very stressful experience going to see Tenet, the new Christopher Nolan film, which is the first movie I've seen in theaters in at least 6 months, if not longer. I can't remember the last time I went to go see a movie. I had to drive downtown to go see this in 70 millimeter because I wanted to see it the way that Nolan intended. And only one theater in the city of Columbus has a 70 millimeter projector, and I think it's the only one in the state. So, so I drove downtown, and college was back in, and the streets were crowded with college kids who are the most entitled pedestrians of all time. So it was just a lot of stress even getting down there and getting into the theater, and of course you have to be wearing a mask, and they have to validate your parking, and then you have to go to an assigned seat that's 6 feet apart from everyone else in the theater. So before the movie even started, I was already like tense. And then I saw this crazy mind fuck of a theatrical experience. God, there's so much to talk about. So it's hard to be streamlined with this. That's the issue. There's so much to discuss. Like, do you talk about Nolan's career? Do you talk about this in comparisons to Inception? What he was going for, theories? I read a lot of reviews, which I would say this is mostly getting positive reviews, but this is definitely more mixed than I was expecting. I thought this would be a very critically acclaimed movie, especially following up Dunkirk, which is Nolan's best reviewed film, and I think one of his best films, at least his top three. This, though, is more in line with the reviews of The Prestige, which I think is an underrated film critically, and it's actually kind of more in the realm of like Interstellar when it comes to overall critical reviews. I'll say this, I do like this movie more than Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar. I don't think it's a Nolan disappointment in the way that those were. I know a lot of people love Interstellar. I still think the third act just ruins the whole movie. If the third act wasn't so terrible, I still think that overall it would be a pretty good movie, and I like most of it. But yeah, love being the answer I can't get behind. So Tenet, to give you a little bit of a synopsis about what it is, we follow the protagonist played by John David Washington in the big opening action sequence at the Opera House, which is the prologue, the IMAX prologue, and then he, it seems like he's dead. He takes a cyanide tablet, but he lives. It was a test. He passed, and he's brought into Tenet, which is an organization that is communicating with people in the future or has access to technology from the future. Essentially, the future, whoever the higher powers in the future, is trying to destroy the past. And there are items that have been spread around, the Horcruxes, if you will, the Dragon Balls, that are pieces from the future that have been separated in the past, that if put together will destroy the past and save the future. So either the future gets destroyed and the past is safe, or the past gets destroyed and the future is safe, is how I took it. I will say I didn't totally 100% get everything. I think I got the movie overall. A lot of people are saying they didn't understand the movie. I don't think it was hard to understand. I don't think it was complexity. I think it was convoluted. I think this is one of Nolan's more convoluted movies. It has a narrative structure that's more in line with Memento or The Prestige, but I don't think it's as well written. And you're going to hear this complaint a lot, but it's just a valid complaint. The sound mixing on this movie. I remember hearing this complaint in Dark Knight Rises with Bane. You know, the why would you shoot a man before throwing him out of an airplane? You know, and then Inception with the blah. And I didn't generally have a problem with the sound mixing so much in those movies. I was able to understand the dialogue pretty well. And Dunkirk, I had that issue slightly, and with Interstellar, but with Dunkirk, most of the movie is visual, so you didn't really need to hear the dialogue. It wasn't important. However, in this movie, that criticism that Nolan's been getting for years about heavy exposition, I never really liked that criticism much either. I thought that typically Nolan films, yes, they have exposition, but I like a lot of the dialogue in his movies. I think Inception has a lot of funny, quotable lines. This movie, on the other hand, though, is a lot of exposition, is a lot of characters saying things that kind of just to move the plot along or to explain what's happening instead of the characters having relationships and dynamics. We don't even know anything about our main character, and we don't even know his name, which I don't have an issue with. But I will say, yeah, the sound mixing, I think Nolan doesn't do ADR, and the IMAX cameras are so loud, so it's hard to record audio during filming. So instead of going into post and fixing the audio and having the actors do their audio after the movie's filmed so it can be good, and then keeping the octaves of the music at a certain level, Nolan has the music up here during scenes of dialogue between characters. During the action scenes, this wasn't an issue, or during like a montage or something happening visually, that didn't bother me. I didn't mind the loud music. I like a loud movie. But it was very odd that there's legitimately scenes in this movie where, for instance, Robert Pattinson's character Neil and John David Washington are having conversations about the time inversion, and it's just the music is really loud during these conversations, and they're just kind of scenes that don't need music that loud. It feels like you're watching a series of montages. There's a lot of jump cuts in this movie. It's beautifully edited. It's beautifully shot. Hoyt von Hoytema, I believe, is a cinematographer who's worked with Nolan since Interstellar. World-class cinematographer. He replaced Wally Pfister. Amazing work. He also shot Let the Right One In, the Thomas Alfredson film, which is one of my favorite vampire movies ever. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. A gorgeous movie. It was beautiful seeing it in 70mm. The lighting was phenomenal. The shot composition. On a technical level, I really have few issues with this movie that way. Like, visually, this is one of Nolan's best looking movies. I don't think it quite reaches the highs of Dunkirk, and I also don't think it has some of the imagination of some of his other films. But this is polished, good looking filmmaking. I mean, this is like what I think Michael Bay always tries to do with his movies, and I think Nolan actually accomplishes it, which is just this kinetic energy and this larger than life scope. Every shot is huge. Every moment is huge. He actually has a lot in common with Michael Bay in that sense, from a photography standpoint. He's just a much better writer, and he's better with directing actors and telling a story. So the character components of this film, I was very attached to Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, who I have been in love with ever since I saw his performance in Good Time. I can't wait for him to be Batman. I don't know where the hell Robert Pattinson went away and came back as this charismatic, amazing actor. And the Kenneth Branagh character, he has a wife who he's basically holding hostage. And he's holding her hostage with access to her son. And her and John David Washington's relationship are the noir elements that Nolan always likes to have. She is definitely she's very much a female out of a noir. Her performance and her character and Robert Pattinson's character, I really liked in this movie a lot. I thought they really were great. I thought they had any of the emotional core from this movie comes from them. And I really like how her plot line wraps up. Kenneth Branagh is hamming it the fuck up. This is very much a James Bond movie, which is, a lot of people have been wanting Christopher Nolan to do a James Bond movie. And watching this movie, I thought about it. He hasn't made a just streamlined Hollywood movie since Insomnia, which is a movie a lot of people don't like, and that's one of my favorite Nolan films. I often wonder with Nolan if he just made thrillers like that movie that's a very, straightforward Hollywood thriller, or if he just made a generic action movie that had a straightforward plot, like here are the bad guys and you're the good guys and you have to stop them. I think he would be amazing at it. I think he could make crime movies. I think he could make action movies, but he always has to take those kinds of movies and then add a science fiction twist to it. Inception could be a movie about guys pulling a heist, but it has to be about dreams. Or this movie could be a spy film about Russians getting access to some kind of nuclear technology, and John David Washington and Robert Pattinson's character having to stop it, but it's about time inversion. And I think sometimes Nolan does himself a disservice with that, because if he doesn't pull those elements off wholly, he ends up making a film that, while is unique in the genre, isn't totally above a lot of the cliches within the genre itself. And I think this movie suffers from that greatly, in that sense that it is just a lot of people running around, shooting guns, car chases. It's all beautifully shot. It's all wonderfully executed. This is arguably the best hand-to-hand combat action scenes Nolan has ever done, because there's fight scenes where some character is inverted and another character is normal moving forward, and it's just a bizarre thing and hard for your mind to totally process. And I was just like, wow, that's when the movie's like hitting. Whenever the action scenes collide with the inversion and the somebody moving in forward time, whenever those scenes happen, like a highway chase or fist fights and stuff, that's when the movie is like awesome and is a spectacle and is like nothing you've never seen before. I've never seen anything quite like that before. And that's that Christopher Nolan touch. There's also great things Christopher Nolan does. Like, he'll set something up that he's very good with, that he's done since Memento and is carried on through The Prestige and Inception, where a character will remember something or see something. For instance, a character sees somebody jump off of a boat and dive into water, and then at the end of the movie you figure out what that is. And even though it's sort of obvious, how he does it is rather clever. He also does something similar to that with Robert Pattinson's character, but I won't spoil that. But those Nolan things are great. He also does this thing where he'll cut to flashbacks, and he does this in all of his movies basically, but it'll cut to like a memory of something, and just the way it's shot is very elegant and beautiful and puts you in this time, in this place. So all of that stuff was just good Christopher Nolan stuff that I really dug. And I liked how analytical this movie was. I liked how cerebral this movie was. Where it messes up is it just gets clunky in the dialogue and in the characterization and the characters interacting. I did not respond to Kenneth Branagh's character. I thought that he was menacing, but there's points where he's saying, if I can't have you, then no one can, which is the most cliche line of dialogue ever. And it's like, you couldn't come up with a more clever line of dialogue than that, Nolan? There's just really lame one-liners, There's a part where John David Washington's getting pat down. He's like, normally if someone's touching me like this, you got to buy me dinner first. Just really cheesy, lame shit like that isn't funny. That surprised me that he even put it in the movie. I didn't so much mind when they were talking about the science behind these things, when they were talking about the physics and how everything works. I was cool with all that. I don't think it was as streamlined and as well done as it was as an Inception. But it didn't need to be. It was a different kind of movie. It's sort of like Inception. But Inception, you always had the emotional stakes of Leonardo DiCaprio trying to get back to his kids. The main character here really doesn't have an emotional stake on the line. He's a guy that is all business. He is a secret agent like James Bond, and he is there to just get the job done. He's kind of a cold bastard. John David Washington's very good in the movie. I like him. I sometimes think that his delivery was a little weird. There's points where he just says lines like, how he says them is odd. He just delivers them in a very weird way. He sounds like his father. He definitely has the voice of Denzel, but I don't think he's quite mastered the way that Denzel can really like bring gravitas to a scene. He seemed, to me, it seemed like he was a little uncomfortable, quite honestly. Like the movie almost overwhelmed him. The costume design is fantastic. All of the suits and everything are as good as they were in Inception. I think this will get an Oscar nomination for costume design. It's a classy looking movie. I like that King George from Hamilton was in this movie for a few minutes. That was really fun. Aaron Taylor Johnson shows up in this movie in the third act, who I've always liked, and he's pretty good in the movie, although he doesn't get a lot to do. All I could get from this movie, and from a lot of Christopher Nolan movies, is that he keeps trying to make Akira. And you're going to be like, what the fuck were you talking about? But I don't want to go too much into like psychedelics and tripping, because a lot of people in the comments are like, what is this, the Joe Rogan podcast? You're talking about DMT and acid and all that. And so I'm not saying that psychedelics are the answer to the meaning of life in the universe. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they can create an illusion of you feeling as if you've tapped into something in the universe. If you've ever done acid or if you've ever tripped, it feels like somebody from another dimension or someone from another time is communicating with you, and time doesn't fall into its linear pathways. You feel like you've existed before your birth, and you feel like you see the world after your own death. And I'm not saying that you actually tap into that world. I'm just saying that's what you feel like when you're tripping, when you get this rush of dopamine and serotonin. When you're really tripping. you feel like you're communicating with parallel universes. You feel like you're existing in multiple timelines, and you feel like that the government, in particular, for some reason, you feel like the government is holding access to God, like they have God, and they're keeping it from you. This communication that we can have with some other being out there. Once again, I'm not saying any of this is a fact or true. I'm just saying this is what you feel like when you're high. I'm not saying that this is a reality. So don't be like, what are you, crazy? I don't believe. Like, I'm not saying that's reality. I'm just saying that's what you feel like when you're tripping balls. And there's a lot of that in Akira. You know, in Akira, the government keeps Akira, who basically turned into a nuclear bomb. They keep him in these jars inside of this facility under a stadium. And Tetsuo, when he gets these powers, when he gets this access to his telepathy and all that, and telekinesis and so on, not just telepathy, but telekinesis, he wants to go find God. Akira is essentially a god that man created. Because when man created the nuclear bomb, he is the destroyer of worlds. You know, that's the quote, I am God, the destroyer of worlds, or I am death. I am death. I am now death, the destroyer of worlds. So what creates life, what destroys life? In a biblical sense, it's God, or God as a metaphor, essentially. So at the end of Akira, a lot of people have a hard time interpreting that ending, but I always took it as Tetsuo, Akira, and the children create a new dimension. There's another Big Bang. They create a new universe where they can exist with their power because their power cannot be contained on Earth. And it's essentially saying that man should not have control over nuclear weapons. And it's the reason why it's a Japanese film and a manga by a Japanese artist, because, you know, obviously they're the ones who have suffered from that. So there's a little bit of that in Inception. There's some transcendence, and you'll see this in other movies like Field of Dreams. But a lot of those movies kind of go from it in an emotional way. Like there's just a baseball field that he built in the middle of a cornfield, and the past is somehow communicating with him, and then some unknown beyond that in the cornfield. And then a man is able to play baseball with his father as a younger man and find transcendence, in a sense. This movie had a lot of Akira in it, in the sense that it had the scale of Akira, and also the machine that they go into that inverts time, that you go to with the red and the blue, reminded me a lot of Under the Stadium, where they're holding Akira, where the government's holding it, and Tetsuo goes to. That's what I thought immediately. And I also think that the way that the movie sort of ends and what it's saying also reminded me of Akira. But the thing with Akira, and why not many movies have been able to match it, excluding perhaps 2001, is that Akira really does have that scale visually that few movies have ever had. It really feels and looks like the most epic movie ever. But the film is operatic and emotionally at those highs. You don't need everything explain, the science behind the telekinesis and how the government made this stuff and how Tetsuo's powers work and all these things going on. It's like convoluted on purpose because you're experiencing through the emotions through teenage angst. Like it's these kids who don't understand these complex things about the world, and they're trying to deal with them with their big emotions. Tetsuo is so emotional because he's a teenager that's had a horrible life. So Nolan is trying to do what Otomo did with Akira, and I don't think that's me projecting. I totally think I think he obviously likes that movie. He clearly liked Paprika when he made Inception. So I think he's trying to tap into that scale, and I think he has in a lot of ways. This is a big movie. This is one of the biggest movies I've ever seen. Like, the world is at stake here. There's so many ways to interpret the conversations and the character decisions in this movie. But unlike Akira, which brings the big emotions with it, that it can be a convoluted movie because it doesn't need to make sense, because it's all in service of creating some sort of new art form and emotionally trying to get these ideas across, or just letting them be there and you can interpret them in a subjective way. Nolan goes out of his way in this movie to over-explain everything that's going on. He has the characters really just spelling out everything that's going on and saying it to you in about as most streamlined of a way as it could be without it just being a college lecture. Sometimes Nolan feels like he's a professor and not a filmmaker. It feels like how his mind works is very mathematical, and how he times the music with the sequences in the movie, or he's a conductor even, how he puts things together. I think sometimes he doesn't care about the humans in his movies as much as he cares about his concepts and exploring them and trying to explain them to you visually, uh, and through dialogue through the movie, so you can understand these, so you can understand things like quantum physics or black holes or dreams and lucid dreaming or memory, like with Memento or something like that. That's where Nolan's really good. And the times when he isn't getting into that stuff so much, where it's just his pseudo philosophy, is like the Batman movies. But those are really good because the philosophy's sort of in the background while it's a fun comic book movie that's on the surface. This, on the other hand, is I early on there's that dialogue. It says, don't try to understand it, feel it. And it's clearly Nolan communicating with the audience, and I wish he would let me feel it. I wish that he wasn't trying to communicate or get me to understand it or have that way. I wish he just let things happen. This was the issue with Interstellar. At the end of Interstellar, it's like, oh, of course the book at the beginning was Matthew McConaughey in the time thing in the library, and he's talking to Murph because love connected them through the universe. Instead of letting it just sort of end and us having to come to our own interpretation, sort of like how 2001 ends, even though Kubrick has explained the ending to 2001. But, every science fiction movie always ends up at the space baby. That's always the issue when you try to meet God, whenever you try to make your Prometheus. And the only science fiction film I think that's ever reached that level of, meeting your creator and it being satisfying as a story to where you're not cringing at somebody trying to even attempt this, is Blade Runner. That's really the time where I'm like, okay, Ridley Scott got it that one time when Roy goes to meet Tyrell and he's essentially meeting God. He is the fallen angel and he is meeting his creator. He is meeting God. And he kills God. He kills his creator, And then he finds that the meaning in life essentially is that just to exist is a beautiful thing, and that time is something that you're not owed. Living in fear is tough, but all memories and moments are lost, and Roy dies. But we all die. We all lose all of our memories and moments. So the androids are really no different from us. We go through the same thing. We all want to know where we came from or why we're here. And to deal with the reality of non-existence and it all being meaningless is tough for a lot of people to grasp. So we cling on to things trying to find meaning. And I just wish Nolan kind of went into that more. I wish that he just let things be. I think, the time inversion, I get having to explain that. And I get, we have to have some rules. We need rules in the movie so things have they make sense during the action scenes. And I didn't have any issue with any of that. I thought that was all fine, but sometimes I wish Nolan would just lean into his premise more instead of trying to observe it or advance it. He did this with Inception, but Inception I think is much better about this. But, get surreal with it. This is essentially a very trippy, surreal movie, Tenet. And even the title being Tenet. And he doesn't let it be a surreal, trippy movie. It's always kind of caged in and being a spy action thriller. And it doesn't let your mind go to those places that you would go if you were tripping on some sort of drug, if you were on a psychedelic. And I think movies can give you that sort of experience. I think they can be elevated to that sort of place. And I just don't think that Nolan would risk that to let that happen. I was impressed with Dunkirk that he let some poetry come in, that he leaned on his Terrence Malick influence more with that movie and not so much his Michael Mann or Ridley Scott influence. And I was hoping with Tenet he would go more into the poetry and the philosophy and just showing and not telling and letting scenes play out and just sort of letting you understand them and feel them and go with them, and it would make sense in its own way. But this movie has a lot of dialogue, and it has a lot of like guys in the military or Robert Pattinson's character just explaining what's happening, and them having very, freshman year of college conversations about these sort of things, like the grandfather paradox. And if we're already having this conversation, does that mean that the apocalypse never happened? And then so it's all that stuff, and it's fun and it's entertaining, but it's not. He didn't come up with kind of his own lingo and own rules that I think made it stand out in the way that some of his other movies did. So that's my biggest negative. And I know some of you are going to be like, dude, you're just crazy. You just sound like a drug addict who was trying to be like, hey, man, Tenet, brother. But I really think that's where a lot of this movie's getting at, because they discuss these things in the movie, and Kenneth Branagh's character directly talks about this, about basically being God because he controls the fate of the world. And so I definitely saw the Akira connections there. Having said that, though, and once again, Kenneth Branagh's performance is just, it's funny. And the sound mixing, there's a scene where they're on these boats and Kenneth Branagh and John David Washington are talking with these helmets on and these microphones, and it's like, why would you record audio this way? And then in the second half of the movie, they're always wearing masks. Nolan somehow predicted that you have to wear face masks when you go out in the world. He went back in time and he went to the future and saw COVID-19 and then went back in time and made a movie about it. So those are my issues, and it sounds like I don't like the movie. But I'm really just trying to get into what thematically I came away with from the movie. Having said all that, though, I like this movie. I think if the dialogue was better, and if some of the character relationships and character development was there more, I think this could be a great movie. I think it's like a really good movie that's just under the surface of being great. And I don't think if I rewatch it 6 or 7 times, it's going to become a great movie. I think it's always going to be limited in some ways. But it still is an experience to see it in the theater, to feel the tension during this movie. It never stops. It's 2.5 hours, and it just keeps going from the opening all the way to the end. The cinematography, the score by the guy who did the score for Black Panther, who's replacing Hans Zimmer here, the editing, the flow of the movie, all of that is fantastic. And Nolan has just become a better technician with every film. And so all of that was amazing. The spectacle of this movie was truly beautiful, and the tone of this movie I liked quite a bit. I liked how this movie felt. I loved, like I said, the costume design, the production design. I really was sort of a seamless experience. I didn't really see a lot of, there wasn't really anything to see like, oh, that special effect doesn't look good, or that piece of music doesn't work, or that all of it was just beautiful. And I also, it's sort of like Dunkirk, you kind of get lost in the movie. It's sort of like, it's not a puzzle you're trying to solve. You sort of just get lost in it like a nightmare or a dream. After a point, this movie's more surreal elements that it had that are sort of David Lynchian in a way too, which I didn't expect from Nolan. It makes me wish that Nolan would make a lower budgeted film that really leaned into this weird stuff that he likes to do, because I think about Primer and how that movie was made for, what was it, $10,000? And there's a lot of Looper here, but I like this more than Looper. But I think about what Primer did, and Primer did so much of this stuff on a low budget, and I think it was more impactful because it had a low budget. I think the concepts were more impactful, where taking a lot of these ideas and exploring them, but with this big, giant action spy thriller, I'm not sure if that mixing of two things matched as well as it has in some of his other films. I think it really matched with Inception, like, let's do a dream heist movie. Let's mix Nightmare on Elm Street with The Italian Job, or Ocean's 11 sort of movie. But I don't know if James Bond meets Primer was the best idea. It's almost like two movies at odds with itself. I would have liked to have seen Nolan's spy film, and I would have liked to have seen Nolan's low-budget time inversion movie. And I just think about Memento and how it cost $5 million, and Nolan doesn't seem to be able to make these kinds of movies anymore without them costing $200 million. And I think he would have to... I think he could do more with less instead of ended up doing less with more, which is what I think happens with Nolan sometimes. I would say this is mid-tier Nolan. I don't think it's up at the best of his films. I don't think it's as good as Memento or The Prestige, or, if you're a Dark Knight person or something like that, But I also don't think it's Interstellar. I don't think it's Dark Knight Rises. I don't like it quite as much as Dunkirk, but it's not like one of those huge disappointing Nolan films, like how I felt when I came out of Dark Knight Rises. I'm pretty positive about this movie. It's just I've seen him do a lot of this stuff before, and the time inversion gimmick and the special effect of seeing that just wasn't as spellbinding or as amazing as some of the other things he's pulled off in his other movies, like the aerial sequences in Dunkirk, or the the room spinning, the hallway spinning in Inception. I just think all that stuff was more impressive from an imagination standpoint. While this movie is, it's less about that, and it's more about just kind of going with it as like a thriller, and it being a really exciting, fun movie. And then at the end, it's like it's a bunch of military guys. Some of them are moving forward, the other ones are inverted, and there's gun shooting everywhere and buildings exploding and then coming back together. And the third act really ties a lot of the movie together. In particular, Robert Pattinson's character Neil and what happens with him really gives this movie, it sort of puts a nice bow on it that ties everything up neatly. And the revelation with John David Washington's character. And all of that was very cool. It even felt like it could have a sequel to it, to be honest. Like you could make a sequel to this more than you could other Nolan movies, excluding his Batman movies. And I'm like, yeah, the Tenet trilogy. And, even though I had issues with John David Washington, I still think he was very charismatic and he looked great on camera. And I think he gave a very winning performance. And I like the fight scenes with him. I like his physicality. Nolan always been criticized for his hand-to-hand combat scenes, and he's clearly improved on that. So thinking about how good Dunkirk was and then the things he's improved on with this, I'm hopeful in the future that his next movie could be one of his best films, if not his best film. I don't think his best film is behind him. I still think he has the potential to make his best movie, and I'm very excited about that. This movie sort of held back by the fact that, it got pushed back so many times. There was so much hype. It's the movie that's supposed to bring back and save the movie theaters. So it almost had expectations that just weren't fair. And it is weird sitting in the theater wearing a fucking mask with other people distanced from you for 2.5 hours. It was an uncomfortable experience for me. Instead of just sitting in a movie theater relaxed like I normally would be, there was still that feeling of living in a COVID world that affected the movie, unfortunately. And I wonder if this movie had just come out in July like it was supposed to. I don't know how the reception would have been. I don't know if critically it would have been handled differently. I think that it just got too much pressure put on it because of the year and what happened. And it's certainly going to hurt the film financially. But I do think it's a good movie, and I do think that I'm very happy because some of the reviews had me really worried that I wouldn't like the movie. A lot of critics were very negative on this movie and were saying it was one of Nolan's worst films. And I was worried I was going to sit there and hate the movie. And I understood all of their criticisms, but I enjoyed the movie thoroughly. I found it to be very entertaining. And I was never bored during it. And I think there's a lot of quality things about the movie that a lot of critics are ignoring that make it stand out from those criticisms. I think there's things about the movie that elevate it above the negatives, and I think those things are worth talking about, and I'm very interested in the discussion about this movie and how people are going to break it down. I just wish maybe in some ways it had a little bit more originality to it, I guess. Would have been nice. I feel like Nolan's playing it a little safe here, more than I was expecting, with just the trailers and everything I was hearing about the movie. But I said overall I'd probably give it like an 8 out of 10. I wouldn't give it a 9 or an 8.5. It's probably even more like a 7.5 for me right now, but I'm just thinking about, I'm going to watch this movie again a few times. So I'll just give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's a solid movie. If it was not numerical, but if it was a different kind of rating, let's say like a B plus, like if I was grading it, I'd give this like a B plus. It's not an A, but he passes the test, and I would recommend the movie. I think it's a very enjoyable movie, and I think it's a very smart movie in the way that it's made, not necessarily totally how it's written, but I think in the way that it's made is very intelligent and shows that, and still proves once again that Nolan is one of the great craftsmen working in the movies today. And I'm hopeful that he will make a movie in the future that is truly combines all of these elements that have been great to his movies for years. I also respected that this film wasn't non-linear. I like that I actually thought this was one of his more straightforward movies in a long time, and I enjoyed that about it. It was nice that it was. I thought it was honestly pretty easy to follow this movie. I don't quite get people saying that they're sitting in the theater confused or they didn't get it. I get not hearing all the dialogue and so forth. I understand that, but I pretty much understood every plot point and what was going on. At least I think I did, but I didn't find it confusing. I think that it was slightly convoluted, but I think that was on purpose. I think it's intentionally the way it is. So you have to take that for what it is. And you're either going to dig it or you're not going to dig it. But we haven't had a big movie like this in the theaters for a long time. And I would say support your local movie theater. I did not go to a big AMC chain to go see this. I went to a local theater to go see this movie, a nonprofit theater at that. And I would like it to stay open because it shows a lot of old films. It shows every art house movie that comes through the city here, a lot of documentaries. And I want them to stay open. So I would say go support your local cinema if you can, so they can keep doing the great work that they do for us film lovers out there. And if you are a film lover, I think there's a lot that you'll find in Tenet. And I think what will surprise a lot of people is that I think the trippy elements of this movie, I think that there's another kind of community that'll attach this movie, that this is sort of a stoner movie, which I wasn't expecting, but there is that element there. But maybe I'll talk about the spoilers in a spoiler review, and I'll go into what I think really happened in the plot, and we can go more into interpretation, and we can communicate on that. But that's the most I can say without spoiling the whole movie. And I promise you, I didn't really spoil that much, just a little bit. But yeah, really good movie. Highly recommend it, and thank you for watching. And I'll see you guys the next time for whatever the next movie coming out is. I don't know what the fuck that is. Like, I'm not going to go see the New Mutants. So it might be a while before you get me reviewing a new movie.